Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Anthony. I am an entrepreneur, and on the side of that I like to get insights from intriguing, thought-provoking and interesting people who are smarter than me and have something to teach me. And so today's guest is Joseph Stanly DeVoir. He is a repeated guest on this podcast. He's been here already one time, so today is the second time I'm filming an episode with him. For all of you that do not know him, he is an American teacher and he is also an American political analyst. He has been a peace activist for a very long time, has a deep knowledge in history, social studies, philosophy, theory of knowledge. He as well coordinates the Creative Activity and Service, shortly called CAS program, for the International Baccalaureate. He is very good in speaking, and so I think that this podcast will be very interesting to you because he can actually engage the audience. Today we are talking about topics that are very emotionally charged. For example, the new presidential election in the United States. And one has to be very careful about how he phrases his words so he can actually come across as he wants. And so today you may think that he speaks rather slowly, which is true, but it is for you so you can actually understand it better, so you can actually think about it while he says it. And so please be patient, watch it full. If you need, pause it, think about it, because I want you to think about what he's gonna say. I want you to make up your own mind. I want you to consider what he says, and I want you to consider it into your own making decision, because I want you to make decisions for yourself, to make up your own mind, and you should consider different perspectives, and he brings a very unique perspective on important matters. And so listen to the full podcast. It will give you much more information than if you just listen to the first 5 minutes. If you listen to the first 5 minutes, you will miss a lot of information, you will miss a lot of knowledge that will make you actually smarter. So for all of you that want to watch it till the end and will watch it till the end, I congratulate you, because it will make you smarter, more knowledgeable person who can understand different topics from different perspectives and has a better view of this world of politics, human nature, power struggles, nations and their affairs. I hope you're sitting comfortable, bring popcorn, and let's dive into it. Last episode we have talked about politics, and mainly American politics, and many things have happened. We've seen presidential election in the United States. So my first question is, what do you believe were the pivotal factors that led to Donald Trump election and win?
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy now, because it's done and we have all of the numbers from the people who voted, and they were pretty dead on what I told you in our last conversation. I mentioned in our last conversation that he may even win the popular vote, and not only did he win it, they're still not done counting votes, and he's winning it by a lot.
Really?
Now, they've got 25% of the votes left in places like California. Other states have taken it very slowly as well. It doesn't mean it's going to change the results, but it will add millions of votes into both his and Kamala Harris's tally, potentially. But in general, he won overwhelmingly, and the reasons that we discussed were exactly what Americans listed. So 78% of Americans claimed that the economy was their most important decision-making factor, and it was. They looked at their situation 4 years ago, looked at it today, and largely made a decision based on factors like inflation, cost of living, etc.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, my most important thing was foreign policy, and we have seen a huge surge in discussions about peace, etc., coming out of the Trump campaign since the election happened. I think that was something that a lot of people voted on. I don't think Americans in general vote because they're thinking about Ukraine, or that they're thinking about Israel, or that they're thinking about Gaza. I think when voters generally think about war, they're not thinking about that war at all. They're thinking about what could we spend that money on at home and how is this war actually helping anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So increasingly throughout the United States, there is an isolationist feeling that perhaps we should pull back from the rest of the world, stop trying to police the rest of the world and tell them how to live, and maybe bring some of that money home to the United States. We have over 800 military bases around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 193, 194 countries. So it gives you a good idea about how much money we're investing into something that a lot of Americans don't feel invested in.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be the two big factors, but I think that we would be foolish to ignore immigration. That was huge in people's voting. And surprisingly, I think the numbers that are looking for some type of deportation program have grown into the 70% in the United States. Hopefully we discuss that a little bit later, what that means, what that could mean. But immigration has played a huge role in people's voting choices as well. I want to make sure this is understood. Donald Trump didn't just win. He won in every single county in America. A county is a small part of a state that
Mm-hmm.
makes up a few cities. Kamala Harris went down in every single county in the United States compared to the last election, and the Republicans went up in every single county. He won Hispanic people. He even won women, which he was supposed to lose. He did better than anybody else in history amongst Black Americans, LGBT Americans, and almost every other group in history. So it wasn't a angry white man movement that won this. And that's why it's going to be a very difficult accusation to stick anymore to the Trump campaign. He is now the most diverse party in American politics, and with a very strong mandate. He did not only win the presidency by a popular vote, but he won the House and the Senate. So he won our entire parliament as well, which is significant. So this was a pretty clear mandate, pretty clear electoral landslide. He won every single battleground state. And as I mentioned in our first meeting, the polling agencies that I think are credible hit it right on the head. Those are polling agencies that are often referred to as right-wing pollsters. It's a stupid name to call them because they've hit the last 3 elections right on the head, while all of these other pollsters are missing Donald Trump by 4 or 5 points every time.
You told me that you are a one-issue voter. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit simplified, but yeah, for the most part, I really do care about war. It is the thing that bothers me the most, and it really does.
Mm-hmm.
When I say that, I don't want to say that other issues don't matter. They obviously do. But for me, I really, that is the thing that motivates me.
Do you think that most people are kind of this one-issue voter, or do you think they consider more issues and put an image and their idea of it together?
I
and
think
then
that
voting based on that?
That's a really good question. You might agree or disagree with me. I think that a lot of the thing that we decide is most important to us is determined by our life at that time. So I'm a relatively comfortable middle-class guy, right? I'm not worried about where I'm going to get my money at the end of the month to pay my bills, right? I'm not. And that doesn't mean I'm wealthy, but that does give me a certain amount of, when I go home, the economy isn't the first thing on my mind all the time, right? And if the price of groceries goes up a little bit, somebody like me doesn't notice.
Mm-hmm.
Others do, and that determines what they think about, right? And so if you are facing economic insecurity, it's hard to sit around and pretend something like abstract that's not affecting your direct life at that moment at any time is going to drive you to vote. So I think it depends on where you are in your life. If you're a young person, your priorities are very different than an old person. If you're a wealthier person or a poorer person, your priorities are very different. If you're a highly religious person, your priorities are very different. And I think people are often a mix of stuff. As I've taught you guys in school, you know, there's a lot of overlap in ideologies. Ideologies are a foolish simplification of reality, a useful tool to understand the world, but never useful enough to get the whole picture. And many of us change. I've been a progressive, a liberal, a conservative, a socialist, and I'll probably be all of those things in some way, shape, or form again before I die.
I would be surprised if you said that most people are one-issue voter, because I think that most people don't have so deep knowledge about one certain topic, for example, as you do about war and peace and stuff like that.
I would disagree. I think that
Okay.
abortion, for example, becomes that single issue for people that care. I really mean that. And we've seen that in 2020. So, number one, abortion isn't something, I agree with your point in general, but abortion isn't something that's going to take a huge amount of time for you to research, develop a strong opinion, right? But it is something that makes people, man, they feel it, right? It's a strong moral issue, and whether they are for it, like you can see in the streets of America today, huge protests, etc., or against it, like my grandmother, and dedicating her time to being a single issue voter based on that issue. You can get a good idea of how that works on the other side too.
It's very emotionally charged.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that see Donald Trump as a threat to gay rights, for example. Well, that will become a really big issue, right? And if your son is gay, or if you are gay, or any of, you know, the closer to home it becomes, the more important it is in your life to defend something or somebody that you feel might be under attack. Yeah.
As a peace activist, how do you foresee Trump's new foreign policies affecting international peace efforts and global alliances?
Well, I've got a couple of videos that I'm actually going to send you afterwards that I think are fun. And one of them talks about, it's only been a day or two and already the world is becoming more peaceful. And what I mean by that is, after the Trump election, there was a huge amount of "we are now ready to talk and negotiate" happening. The first came obviously from China, who immediately declared, we want to de-escalate this relationship problem that we've had over the last 4 years. Towards the end of the Trump presidency, China and the United States were signing some major deals in terms of investment in each other's countries. So that's positive. Instead of seeing China as the next battlefield, we can see China again as an economic partner, and at the very worst, maybe a competitor, not an enemy state that needs to be confronted and sanctioned and isolated. That's a hope in that direction, and China came out and expressed that hope. There is also a discussion already between Donald Trump, Elon Musk, strangely enough, and Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine. And whether this is true or not, some version of a peace plan has been leaked to the press, and I've had a good chance to take a look at that and what apparently the proposal is. Now, I do not believe at all that Russia will accept that particular proposal, nor do I think that a first proposal in a peace process is ever going to be accepted. We're starting out a process. But that Russia already responded immediately that they're open to discussions based upon this. So that is a huge step forward. Hamas has declared they're ready for a ceasefire. And of course, they have been ready for a while, but getting both of them to the table over the details has been problematic. But we might see an end to what's been going on in Gaza, possibly, even though never in a million years did I think Trump would be any better than Biden in Gaza. Then we've had an announcement by the Houthis that they will stop their bombing of ships heading towards Israel. That has kept Americans and Brits and Danes busy trying to shoot down these missiles since it started. They announced unilaterally that they would stop doing that and start talking about a ceasefire. Again, this is all happening within 8-9 hours of me having this conversation. Some of it earlier, some of it later. So by the time we're done, who knows, maybe the Houthis will launch another missile.
Right.
But just from an immediate, this person is not even in power.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big jump and a pretty big change in exactly the direction I was hoping for. And that I think a lot of voters were hoping for, that we can stop the killing and start moving us towards a more peaceful future. So we'll see where it goes. There is a huge amount of stuff happening right now as we speak, and I think it is possible. I don't think it is probable, but I think it is very possible that Donald Trump might be able to solve the conflict 24 hours after he takes office. That is what he promised to do.
Really?
Well, he's working now. So if you are somebody who's serious, this is a very hard thing to do, by the way. It's not easy. But they are already engaging in serious negotiations. They're already talking about where we can start and finish these. To give you an example of the thing that leaked, I mean, we're 2 days into this. He's not even president. And they're talking about recognizing the exact territories that Russia has taken up to this point in the Donbass, recognizing Crimea, putting an international force along the line of combat and then withholding Ukraine from NATO for 20 years and meeting the other. I don't think Russia will accept this, but it's a first offer, and they immediately said, we're going to take this seriously. And if the West is interested in negotiations, well, Russia has claimed to be interested in negotiations for quite some time, so I guess we're going to find out how serious they are. So I think that we've already seen what I would call a legitimation of what I told you, that there is some potential, and that in fact all of these conflicts around the world aren't just accidental, that the Biden administration has played a central role in them, and not only creating them, but continuing them. So there are signs for hope around the world based on the foreign policy front. I would also send you a video by J.D. Vance, which I think is worth seeing. It's a 2-minute quote where he states what I think the average Trump voter thinks about foreign policy, and I think you'd really enjoy it. The basic idea is America needs to stop going around the world and telling other people what to do. That we can build good partnerships based on mutual respect rather than us bullying people, and that the Chinese model of building roads and bridges in these countries is a lot better than our model of walking around and yelling at people and making them do what we want. I think that that is a very popular idea for the American public who doesn't want to send their children to go tell other people how to live their lives.
Right.
And I think that that is the sentiment that people voted for.
Do you think that similar conversation would spark if Kamala Harris would be elected, or it would take a whole different route?
In our last interview, I discussed that in terms of Kamala Harris, the situation in Gaza is pretty clear. The United States says things about a ceasefire, but we're sending 37 planes full of weapons there every single day. So the United States just simply refuses to use its leverage over Israel to get what it wants. There are estimates that Israel could not fight for a week without U.S. weapon supplies in either of these conflicts. So if the U.S. is demanding a ceasefire and then supplying all of these weapons, it's pretty hard to actually imagine we want a ceasefire. Again, I don't know if Donald Trump is going to be too much better in that particular scenario, but I know how Kamala Harris was and what she was saying and how she was going to continue because we've been watching that. The same is largely true for Ukraine. They want to continue the process as is. They would like to continue funding the Ukrainian military and funding the Ukrainian state. Now, of course, in their narrative, they are doing something kind to Ukraine. They view themselves as the ally. And I'm not going to go through whether I agree or disagree with that, but according to their narrative, that's how they view themselves. According to the Trump narrative, they're loving Ukraine to death. And they are loving Ukraine until there may not be a Ukraine, and that if you did care about this place and their people, you'd either enter the war on their side for real, or you'd go and use your power in a peace process and help rebuild this country and what remains of it. So I think that the narrative might be different about why we're doing certain things, but the action would be the same, including our actions towards China. This last administration has done nothing but provoke China over Taiwan. Mm-hmm. I find that to be irresponsible, but highly irresponsible, since we are already so clearly overwhelmed in terms of foreign policy and already driving all of our enemies together as quickly as we can. So I would hope, again, to see a de-escalation in Korea, China, Middle East, Europe.
So your vision for America's future is positive and like more peaceful?
The first American president said America should not become entangled in other countries' affairs. We should not be so deeply involved in what's happening in the world. That what people should love about America, they should be able to look across at us and say, God damn, they've got it figured out. They've got such a beautiful society. I want to be like them. That's called exemplarism. When you become something beautiful and others come to you by example, versus interventionism. I want to go around the world and tell people how they have to live. I want to go around the world and tell people how their government has to function. I want to go around the world and tell people how their women need to dress and all of these kind of things. That's the opposite of exemplarism. So in a way, there is a return to a feeling in America that has come several times throughout our history, and that is, we are not the world. We need to isolate ourselves from the world. This happened after Vietnam. It was very hard to get Americans to go into another war after Vietnam. It took a very long time. We're feeling that now. We've just gone through half a dozen wars that we neither won nor lost nor accomplished anything except for death and destruction. And I think that it would be pretty hard to sell another one of those to the American public. So we're going to go through another wave of isolation. And I think that that's pretty clear in the election.
These waves of isolation have a period of time, like length, or is just...
I mean, I don't know, and I'm not smart enough to sort of math it out at the moment. But I think rather than it being some sort of pattern of history that would happen, I think it's just a direct result of when we go too far in the other direction.
Right.
I mean, we wasted so many tens of thousands of American lives in Vietnam, and then hundreds of thousands of people wounded, especially psychologically, after Vietnam, and we felt those scars for years. And to this day, most Americans can't find Vietnam on a map. They can't tell you why we were there, mm-hmm. right? And as soon as we left, you know, we stopped talking about it, and it stopped mattering immediately. When you go through that experience enough where, you know, it's not like World War II when there was a purpose. There was a bad guy and a good guy and all of these sorts of things. Yeah. War is much easier to justify to people. There's a lot of people today that, in my opinion, sometimes would rightly point to wars like Vietnam and Afghanistan with having to do more with opium than democracy. And it's pretty hard to feel proud about something like that as a soldier when you are patrolling opium fields in Kandahar province. Mm-hmm. rather than fighting for freedom or democracy or anything like that.
Yeah.
By the way, it was just released the other day, the Taliban just announced that opium production in Afghanistan fell to 0%.
Really?
Yeah. So they went from being the largest producers of opium in the world during our occupation to now being 0% producers of opium. That doesn't make me like the Taliban, obviously, but that's great news for European health systems, because it is injectable drugs that are spreading things like hepatitis, AIDS, etc. And obviously the horrible life that comes with addiction. But we've seen a huge opium increase in usage of things like heroin and opioids in general throughout Europe since the Afghan invasion. I know that's a side note, but it's interesting to think that the Taliban might, maybe we should say thanks to them. I'm joking. I don't need any
I understand.
correction on that one, but you get my point.
Was it the Taliban who delivered this news, or journalist from?
Well, it was in Western papers. So I think, I'm sure it would be the Taliban that's making the announcement. They're the government that would even be able to measure or implement such a thing. And it's not hard to understand. There was a huge heroin addiction problem inside of Afghanistan throughout the entire war. And they're a very religious organization. So the idea that they would want to stamp out heroin isn't particularly surprising. The fact that they are a very brutal organization means that if they want to stamp something out, it could happen pretty quick too. So in that case, like I said, I say it tongue-in-cheek when I would ever do anything like praise the Taliban, so to speak, but it gives you a good idea of some of the things that were and weren't happening when we were there.
When we talked about the waves in America being kind of a bully or intervening in other nations' affairs, for me it's almost like impossible to believe that any nation would completely stop doing it, since it's led by people, and like in our human nature we want to conquer others, if it's that possible to say, or just...
I think you're absolutely correct. There's two different types of that thinking, right? So I am a realist, so I believe that in our human nature we are selfish, we seek power and these types of things. And I believe that on a foreign policy and international relations basis. But within this beautiful school of realism, there's a huge spectrum of what normal behavior should be. So there's something called offensive realism, which fits very much into what you're talking about. And that's, you know, countries are going to inevitably try to keep going for that top spot. They're going to keep trying to pursue this. It's a deadly strategy, right? I mean, who do you think faces more threats and security threats on planet Earth, the United States or Switzerland? And who do you think lives better, the United States or Swiss people? The answer to those is pretty easy, quite frankly. And so there is an argument to say that the offensive realist is and it's a dangerous position, and that a real rational realist would pursue something called balancing, right? I don't want to be number one. I want to be somewhere in the mix of some great powers. I don't want to have everybody gunning for me all of the time. And from this perspective, by the way, all of this stuff that America's done has made us weaker. Our military is weaker, our economy is weaker. So there's a very good argument to make that, you know, if you're a realist and you're trying to get stronger, well, you would stop this behavior, would stop this wasteful behavior that might make a few people in your society incredibly rich, but damages the interests of the nation state. I don't think America's stronger because of Iraq or Afghanistan. I think a couple of corporations were. So for me, it is selfish to want to be strong, but how you are strong isn't automatic, right? It doesn't mean you walk around punching everything you see. In fact, there's a good argument to be made for the opposite. So I agree with your fundamental principle, but I think the strategy of how to get there is still up for debate. I don't think we have to walk around, and you know that in your own life. You know that to be powerful and influential, Jimmy, just think about your own personal life. Is it going to be to puff your shoulders up and just go knock yourself into everybody? No. There's a million other ways in which to spread influence and to gain power than that. And that way, more likely than not, will end up with an ass kicking eventually, right? So I think that there's two ways to think about power. There's two ways to think about intervention. And so for a lot of Americans, it's still very realistic to imagine a pullback and imagine that making us stronger rather than weaker.
What do you think is the best other way to gain power over other nations for a nation without wars?
What J.D. Vance said the other day in that clip that I will send to you is China is building infrastructure in countries, right? And that infrastructure will pay off for decades for those people. And infrastructure is the greatest investment you can make in a society. They're not building missile defense systems in the Congo, right? That, you know, like we're sending missile defense systems throughout Europe. They do very little for your schools and your people and your economy, but they might do something for your security. So there's a lot of complaints about Chinese development surrounding the Belt and Road Initiative around the Silk Road, but China, without a doubt, has been building huge amounts of infrastructure in other countries. And they don't do it like we do. I used to work in this, so I can tell you very clearly, when we give money to a country, it's because they do stuff that we want. And Europe is the same. If your country doesn't have abortion rights or doesn't have certain rights for women, you will not receive money from the U.S. government. If your country has decided to change its laws about anything social or anything involving your religion, you may not receive any money from the United States or Europe.
It's a great form of power.
Well, China doesn't care about that at all. If you don't want your women's hair to be seen in the streets, you can still have this huge railway station to develop economically. And think about the difference between how those people feel towards China and how they feel towards the West. I mean, the West has been walking around telling people how to live, and I don't mean this joking. I'm a history teacher. After we destroyed these countries, all of them, for years. So as an African, think of how ridiculous it must sound to have a European telling you how to change your life and your government because they're speaking from some sort of moral high ground to an African country that they likely controlled and raped for decades. And even after these countries gained their independence, European nations meddled in their affairs and politics for decades. So the idea that any of these countries take us seriously as the moral or ethical people on planet Earth, you have to be an American or European to believe that. You really do, and you have to drink your own Kool-Aid too, because others don't. People in the Middle East do not think we are the good guys. People in Africa do not think we are the good guys. People in South America do not think we are the good guys. People in South Asia do not think we are the good guys. And you only have to ask any one of them to find that out.
So these are like two kind of distinctively different strategies to maintain power, like China and USA, how they build it. Of course, like China also has its power in meaning of wars, but it would be interesting to see if USA could adopt over a long period of time what is China doing in this sense, building infrastructure.
I think that we have such a fun example right now that we do the same thing, the European Union and entering into relationships with them, but they always come at so many tiny prices that you have to pay. So we kept Turkey out of the EU for 2 decades, saying, no, fix this, fix that about your society, fix this about your society, fix that about your society, and we'll allow you to engage in this trade bloc so that your people can move freely and so that your products can move freely and our products can come into your country. 20 years we kept them waiting and told them, you know, your society isn't good enough. You have to change this, you have to change this, you have to change this. Turkey applied for BRICS. They can enter tomorrow. And they can have that wonderful benefits of being in a massive economic union without having countries tell them how to live, without having countries tell them what to do. That the Turkish people can make the decision about how to govern Turkey, not the people in Brussels or Washington. And China and Russia have embraced that model. They make it part of every foreign policy speech they give. We are not here to tell you how to live. We are trying to recreate a community of diverse nations that don't follow the same book. And so from a Turkish perspective, what do you think they're going to do? We already have an answer. And they're going to move an incredibly important strategic military and economic power is now going to slide right into the hands of the other side, quote unquote. So I think the answer about which one works better is pretty clear already. And I think that the United States is already realizing that. And I think that the Trump supporter, that's the idea that they're going with. And that's why guys like J.D. Vance get huge rounds of applause from that. The other thing that I would mention is Donald Trump mentioned over the weekend that he might put former CIA guy Mike Pompeo as his Secretary of State. And this is one of those very aggressive Republicans that's been around for a while. Trump supporters went insane online. And by Sunday, Trump went out publicly and said, I will never let that man work in my administration. Because of their aggressive foreign policy, because of their way that they've done. So the idea behind him is he's now promised to have a cabinet with no neoconservative foreign policy analysts in it at all.
We talked about media a lot last time and misinformation, information, and you yourself were present in some media coverage last week, so I would like you to talk about it a bit more.
Yeah, and again, I'll mention some things about my own story, and then what I'd like to do is talk about why it matters, because I'm a teacher, so my personal story isn't that big of a deal.
Right.
But I did approach the media on the day of the election, and I had approached them because of our own student activities that were going on at the time. I also knew that they wanted to talk to me at that moment, that I was a person from America at the exact moment Europe was waking up to the reality that Donald Trump had won the elections. So the thing that happened to me is that I made it incredibly clear that I did not want to speak as a supporter of Donald Trump, and even told them that I'm not telling you who I voted for because this has nothing to do with me. I'm an analyst trying to provide some objective information about why I think he won. To make a long story short, they lied and not only changed everything that I said in very sort of gross ways. They simplified things to the point of being quite stupid. But they put it all in my voice as if this is what I want or what I had said, rather than my analysis of the American people. They did that, and then the worst part was that I told them, please don't do this, and then that happened anyways. But the worst thing was that I had spoken to a tiny local television station. But little did I know that all of these media networks in Denmark are connected. So as soon as I had spoken there, it got pulled up to the largest news website in Denmark and went on the front page for several hours at exactly the moment that Denmark was looking for what Orwell described as a sort of 2 minutes of hate. You know, everybody just needed to let out some steam and some anger. Nobody in this country wanted him to win for the most part. And the funniest part about it was for me, and I mean this, is that That was the only day of the year that I shave. You know me well. And I'm wearing a suit. And so they take this picture of me in this suit with a smile on my face, as if I'm just the most arrogant high school teacher you'd ever meet in your life. And perhaps I am, but that wasn't the time and place for it. And then when it got up there, I think the manipulation and misattribution of everything I said gave the entire nation of Denmark somebody to punch for a couple of hours when they needed to get it out of their system.
Really?
Yeah. So I got hundreds and hundreds of comments about how I should not be a teacher, how I should go home.
Wow.
People managed to find my private emails, do the same. People managed to find my work emails, do the same. Long, long letters, of course. And these things were corresponding to things I'd never said, which makes it so much more frustrating. So even though I'd spent 10 years in Palestine, people were calling me to blame me for the deaths of Palestinians and things like, not calling, but writing, because they were reading what was put in my mouth rather than what I had said. But it was incredible. I never felt that. I've read about that thing before, where all of a sudden you have hundreds and hundreds of people you've never heard of telling you to go home, get the hell out of their country. Do not be around our children was the thing that hurt the worst. So there was a lot of that going on. I of course asked them to correct it. It took them a week to do it, so the damage is done. But they corrected about 75% of what I asked them to do. If this were America, they would be sued. They would be punished for what they did. But it's not. And so I had the fortune of being a punching bag. I'm lucky it's a small country. Could have been worse.
People are incredible in this.
Well, I don't, of course I don't excuse any type of that behavior. Like, it's a weird person that goes and looks for somebody's email address and goes and looks for where they work and then writes them a 3-page email about how they should, all of these kind of things. I mean, it takes a special individual to do that in the first place. But that wasn't how 99% of the feedback was just this sort of short Facebook commentary from normal people who aren't going out of their way to find but some pretty brutal stuff, to be honest. Now, what do I think is interesting about it? Let's forget all of that in terms of my own story. Mm-hmm. Number one, the level of Trump hatred is at this point, I think, for Europeans, dangerous. I really think that we are going to have to get it through our heads as a continent that Donald Trump represents the majority of the United States now, and that not only is that true today, that is likely to be true in the next elections as well. Not that it would be Donald Trump, but that if he is successful in turning the economy around, if he is successful at creating a more peaceful world, there will likely be a J.D. Vance presidency. He's more popular than Donald Trump within the party, within the Republican Party. So I think that over the last years, what I described to the newspapers, that 95% of the coverage in America, according to Harvard University, is negative. But that I would say almost 100% here is. And because of that, Danish people, European people, feel perfectly comfortable comparing the American president to Adolf Hitler or Vladimir Putin, publicly, on their news and privately in conversations with Americans. That's fascinating and dangerous. The United States is your most important economic and strategic ally. And so the idea that the vast majority of them make a pretty clear electoral decision, and a lot of smaller allies have whipped their populations into such a furor over Donald Trump that an average person like me could receive such a backlash is something that is, in the big picture, worrisome. You have to watch now European leaders backtrack from what they've said over the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
In a matter of 2 months, an entirely new diplomatic team is going to arrive in each and every one of your countries. And it's going to be a pro-Trump diplomatic team. He appoints ambassadors. He appoints diplomats. So these people are going to read your newspapers. They're going to talk to your people. And they're going to define our relationship based on things like that. And I think that it's so dangerous already the way that we talk about our enemies. Like, I think talking about Vladimir Putin as if he's Voldemort and he's a cartoon character bad person makes peace impossible, right? How can you negotiate with Skeletor or Thanos? You can't. You can only negotiate with another human being that you can sit down and talk to and reason with. So when we go so horrible with our rhetoric, it makes it impossible to come back to reality, to get the things done that are actually important for our nations. There are Europeans right now that will hit the streets by the millions to stop the fascist dictator of America from visiting their country. I'll tell you what I honestly think. I honestly agree with most Europeans that Donald Trump is narcissistic, that he's hypersensitive to his ego, that he wants to create something great, not because he wants to help people, but because he wants to be remembered forever. Well, if everybody agrees with me about that, that he's immature and unpredictable, they might want to be a little bit more careful about what they say.
That would be intelligent.
That would be wise, right? I mean, if this is your greatest partner, and by the way, we have 78% of NATO or whatever, or 80% of the NATO military, at a time when you guys have more and more enemies. I think that we need to tone down the rhetoric a little bit. Donald Trump and the people who voted for him aren't racist. Otherwise, you just called 51% of Hispanic people racist,
Mm-hmm.
and 51% of America racist, and 30% of black Americans racist. And they're not anti-woman. And if you continue to claim that, you are now calling half of America that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of a story in and of itself. Who cares what happens to a local high school teacher? When we look at the big picture, the rhetoric is so far ramped up at this point that it could actually do harm to countries if they are unable to, at least in their public media, differentiate between the American president and the president of Russia. Instead, they are equated constantly in the media, or even Hitler, which happens often enough.
So emotionally charged. People are so emotional about this. Not that we're not always emotional about things, but it's...
Well, that's why the whole thing that I wanted to talk about today was the media. I don't blame anybody for being emotional. If what the media was saying was true, they have huge reasons to be afraid.
Yeah.
I told them so many times, Donald Trump never promised a bloodbath. He promised a bloodbath in the car industry. Donald Trump will not get rid of abortion. He actually made it impossible for the President of the United States to ever get rid of abortion. That's what he did. But you got people going to vote as if he's going to be able to wave a wand and take away their rights. That was never true. People were running on this thing called Project 2025, which is a ridiculous report produced by the most right-wing conservative think tank in American history, the Heritage Foundation. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump rejected that publicly 50 times. Didn't matter. It was this sort of, we're going to turn into this dystopian right-wing conservative hellhole. So you had a lot of fear, and if the things that were being said were true, then those people had huge amounts of reasons to be fearful. Again, one of the most interesting and perhaps terrifying things for me in this coming election is that the vast majority of Americans now support the deportation of immigrants. And I'm talking about the vast majority of Americans. And Donald Trump has said that is the first thing they're going to do. There's as many as 20 million illegal immigrants over the last 4 years. Those are some of the estimates. That's a lot. That's 4 Denmarks, for example. And those are there are estimates that go up to 30, and there are estimates that go down to 10. How something like that works in America is, I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But it not only has that been the promise, but they've done regular polling, and it has overwhelming support. And it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats too. And that makes sense because obviously when large numbers of immigrants come in, they flock to cities where there's more services and more jobs and more infrastructure. And those are mostly Democratic areas in America. Mm-hmm. So they overwhelm services, they overwhelm hospitals, local schools, etc. So there's been a huge jump in support for deportation. I have no idea how something like that works in America, constitutionally, practically, morally. Not sure. I think that's a big question mark that I have domestically. But you did ask me some other things. Donald Trump will be, on day one, has talked about deportation domestically. He's also put Robert F. Kennedy in charge of our health. So we are going to have an absolute change in every food that Americans are allowed to eat in the coming years. We are going to have an absolute change in how drug companies work in America. There was an emergency meeting of the 5 largest drug companies over the weekend, and it has been reported consistently that they are utterly terrified of what happens when Kennedy takes control. His movement is called Make America Healthy Again, and he is probably one of the most successful lawyers in American history at fighting large government agencies. So he knows them from top to bottom, and Trump has put him in charge of our health, what would be the Ministry of Health in a European place. Mm-hmm. Trump has also promised to drill, baby drill, as it's referred to. So America is about to start producing tons of energy, tons of it. That's going to drive down global prices dramatically, which could even help lift Europe out of its recession. It could drive down prices that much. So those would be 2 of the things happening immediately. Obviously, you probably heard that stock markets, cryptocurrencies, currencies in general are up across the world since his election. Because, again, a platform moving towards a more business-oriented foreign policy would probably be good for these markets. So domestically, there are a lot of things happening as well. For us here, and this is my little treat to you, I think the funniest thing that's going to happen, and the thing that's most interesting right where we are right now, mm-hmm. is Donald Trump is going to get Greenland. You heard it here first. And so Denmark...
Going to get Greenland?
Yeah, that's my belief. And that he, for all of the reasons that we talked about before, he tried last time, he just...
Like in what sense?
Poked the ideas out there. He'll buy it, or he'll get it through treaty. Again, that's the face you just made is a common thing for Europeans, and I understand that. He mentioned it before. That's why I think it's so fascinating to be in Denmark at this time and to think about Danish relations, because in my opinion, this is coming pretty soon in terms
of...
Is it
possible? You can just...
Let's discuss that. It's a really fun idea, actually. He did it last time. He said, we'd like to buy Greenland. And, of course, the Danish government called him absurd for that, and then Denmark got punished economically for insulting the president. In general, America has bought 45% of America. That's how we do expand, is we buy our country. So we bought a huge section of our country from Napoleon when he needed some money. We bought other sections of our country, like Alaska, from Russia. We bought parts of our country from Mexico or the Spanish government. America has expanded by purchasing large territories a number of times. The other interesting thing is, of course, America already has the largest military base and influence in Greenland as it is. So we accidentally dropped a nuclear weapon on Greenland once. Nobody knows that, but my wife is, her father was there. And
Really?
Yeah. We dropped a nuclear weapon on Greenland. It's another story.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is fascinating for Denmark is, number one, this could be a huge opportunity for this to become the richest, most secure country on planet Earth while still maintaining its sovereignty and freedom. Or America doesn't have to trade Denmark for anything. Greenland is owned by Greenlandic people, and we can just deal with them instead of the Kingdom of Denmark. Which means that about, well, less than 100,000 people, or around 48,000, I can't remember the exact numbers, America can make them an offer much, much bigger than what Denmark ever could. They have poor schools, poor infrastructure, huge rates of alcoholism, abuse, and other things that a good amount of investment could really improve a heck of a lot of lives. And it would cost America probably less than we spend on the New York library system to double the amount of money that the Danish government puts in.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some ways in which this could be an incredibly interesting thing to do. And what I mean by that is, if everybody thinks Donald Trump is an egotistical, megalomaniacal guy, well, there you go. That's about as big as it gets. And if you know him, he likes big things, and he'd like to put his name on something big like that, and has already floated the idea. So I think that that's interesting, and I think that it's that level of what would I say, new thinking, new ideas that make this new administration really exciting in some ways as a teacher, because now I can come into class and talk about stuff that I didn't imagine I'd be talking about the day before or even in my lifetime. So that's neat.
And the reason for USA to do such move would be oil, I suppose.
Rare earth minerals mostly. So it's all of these different minerals. And of course, again, Denmark is a liberal European country at this point. It does not own Greenland. It helps Greenland. Mm-hmm. But Greenland has a degree of autonomy on its own. And of course, the United States could simply say, Denmark doesn't own Greenland. This is the 21st century. This is not 1594. There's Greenlandic people that can make this decision for themselves.
Be so interesting.
What would be interesting to me is if we never saw it coming and never had the conversation about how to handle it. What would be interesting to me is if Danes responded in exactly the same way they responded the first time. And that's why I think it's funny. If Donald Trump brings this up in the next couple of months, that means it's going to be very serious to him. It's going to be a very serious part of his administration. Like I said before, Denmark could parlay that into becoming a free and independent country of Denmark, but having all of the benefits of being the 51st state of the United States of America in terms of economic and security guarantees. Denmark could do that, or they could call Donald Trump and anybody who thinks like him an idiot and see what happens. Mm-hmm. Right? They could. That's why I think that's a perfect example of how we need to start rethinking how we're talking about the most powerful country in the world and its citizens, and by extension their leader. Because he's now there. He's not even in power yet, but for example, Joe Biden cannot decide to start launching missiles tomorrow into Moscow. The army will no longer take that order. There is another president on his way in. They are well aware of what his policies are. He is now meeting on a regular basis with the head of the military and the CIA and every other institution at the same time that Joe Biden is. So there is a transition underway where a president who just lost a major election is not allowed to start pressing lots of buttons on his way out the door, if that makes any sense.
I just want to ask and clarify for me personally. There is a president now, and there's a new president coming in the way. So who has the final say on these important matters? Or
Well,
is there
of course, Joe Biden has the ability to make decisions at this very moment, right? And you can imagine emergency scenarios in which the President of the United States would have to make a foreign policy decision, even one involving like missiles and rockets. Yeah? Let's say a base is attacked in Iraq. Can Joe Biden respond to an Iranian militia tomorrow? Yeah, he can. Can Joe Biden make major strategic military decisions anymore? No. The United States president just won the election, or the incoming president has won an election stating that he's going to be negotiating between Ukraine and Russia. The United States military will respect that position. They will not allow that position to be sabotaged now in the final months, unless every single person wants to lose their job. And you can imagine how that would work. I mean, you do want to work with the next administration, and they're coming in a month, right? And so it's not just a matter of self-preservation, but you would be betraying the American people if you did the opposite of what they just asked to do in an election.
No, okay, that's true.
And so for the most part, it's not as if Joe Biden is powerless right now, but he is unable to single-handedly steer American foreign policy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Didn't think of those important factors. Last time we also discussed journalism, and I just want to briefly get back to the media side. I personally do not understand how, when you have a media company or a government media company, and then you have journalists who go around and interview people, for example, like yourself, and then they have to, well, write in it on the news, and they usually portray it in some way, shape, or form. So is this decided by the journalist alone, or is there some double checking, or does the media see every interview?
Take my hit job, for example, last week. Denmark needed that Trump supporter guy, and they were not ever going to find a Trump supporting guy who was dumb enough to say, I love Donald Trump, at the exact moment that everybody in the country is looking for somebody to say that and to beat the hell out of them, right? So because nobody would stand up and take that spot, they just created that character. They just created it. And in this case, it was a young blogger. And again, bloggers are different than journalists. They follow different rules, etc. They want to be journalists, and they might someday become journalists, and they might even have the word journalist on a card. But they're the ones putting out very short stories on a daily basis. And the type of attention-grabbing headline stuff that's very good for social media. So bloggers are social media news producers for the most part, right? They're the ones producing short, punchy stuff. Now, bloggers typically are not doing what that person is doing and lying and cheating to create the story that they want to create. It's not necessary to do that most of the time. But like I said, you were not going to find somebody to stand up and say, I love Donald Trump at that moment. And that's why I went to such pains to tell them how dangerous this was, what they're doing. So in that case, they created it. Now, whether she did as a young person that wanted to get into a national, whatever, same things we were talking about before. Why do they lie? Why do they cheat? Why do they steal? Well, they're climbing a ladder, you know, and this was a good ladder to climb, and that perfect timing and that sort of thing. So happy days. She got a national profile that day, and that was very, very good for her. The editors have changed it, and they've changed it after I repeatedly asked them to and explained how horrible it was, and demonstrated the damage that it had done to not only the school, not only my family and all of this, but it took quite a while for them to do it anyways, but they eventually did it. But again, does that mean it was just one bad apple and the editorial staff of these places is good? No. No. This isn't, the type of stuff that I talk about on a regular basis isn't an accident. Like I said, there's so many, in this case I was talking to the Danish media, there's so many Danish media that still describe Donald Trump as threatening a bloodbath if he loses the election. They do it over again and 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 over again. There is no way on earth that they believe that to be true anymore. So I don't think it's an accident. And that's why I'm saying it's a matter of strategy for a nation to start changing and moderating the way that it speaks about its greatest allies. Because I don't think it's an accident. I think that if you explain Trump better to Europeans, they wouldn't think that half of America's insane. I mean, they might not agree with them, but they wouldn't think we're insane, for God's sakes. They would have a good idea of why people are feeling the way that they feel and voting the way that they vote.
It's also not only like mass media, but also social media and the people who have influence on it. It would be important to change, I don't know if change their mind, but maybe educate them with different perspectives so they could talk about different perspectives, and then the people who listen to them could make their own mind.
My favorite part of this election, Antonin, is this. Kamala Harris had the support of all of Hollywood.
I saw that.
She had the support of every influencer
Many.
money can buy.
Yeah.
And the American voter just spit in their faces. And that makes me really happy. It really does, because what do these wealthy athletes and billionaires know about the life of a normal human being? And how dare they tell us how to think?
So you don't think?
I think that this election was the death of the idea that Taylor Swift is going to win you an election. I really do. I think that if people are dumb enough to think that that still works after what they just saw, they are foolish. And the other side of this that I think is really important is that not only are Americans and people in general immune to that level of stupid celebrity, how dare you, you little boy? I'm a rich movie star. Let me tell you how to think. It's like, okay, let me tell you how to feel about taxes and war. Okay. So that was rejected fundamentally. And you could see that. I mean, there's more Taylor Swift fans posting videos about how they voted for Trump than there are Taylor Swift fans posting videos about why they didn't. The other thing that I think is incredible is an announcement made by Trump the other day. He laid out a 5-part plan to destroy censorship online completely and utterly. And not only destroy it online in the future, and create a digital bill of rights for every internet user, which concerns things like privacy and the ability to market to us, etc. And impose that on the American tech sector. That there's going to be a very different social media in the upcoming election. That the social media that we've seen in the last 4 years has been openly censorious. I think the greatest example of that would be something like Corona, where they were not even hiding the fact that they were censoring or claiming some ideas are disinformation, some ideas are good information. According to his new proposal, the use of those 2 words will be banned. Nobody decides what's misinformation and disinformation inside of a society that has free speech. There is no power capable of deciding that sort of thing.
Awesome.
So we're going to be heading into a very different social media environment starting soon. Facebook will change. Instagram will change. Twitter already has changed in terms of what you can and cannot say on there. But many other things will change, and what you'll see is, and this will happen immediately, I post often about Palestine, about the genocide that happens in Palestine. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of friends on Facebook, many of them who've lived in Palestine, and my post will be seen or liked by like one. In this new world where things stop getting shadow banned and not talked about in social media, you're going to start noticing that there was a lot more different ideas out there that were just being kept in the dark by algorithms and by companies that had decided to moderate what people can and can't say. Now, this doesn't mean hate speech or threats of violence will be allowed online, but you will no longer be able to remove somebody's opinion for criticizing public policy, like vaccines mandates, for example. Those things were just removed from the public debate. That will be illegal, and not only will it be illegal in the future, Trump is going to go back and prosecute anybody who did it in the past because they broke our Constitution. You're not allowed to tell us what to say and not to say on the internet. And companies that do it in the future will be punished. So I think the next election is going to be very different. I think that the ability to communicate ideas will be more free. On the other hand, if you are one of those people who believes that social media needs to be regulated because of misinformation and disinformation, well, your world just got a lot harder. I'm not one of those people, but
I'll have to read more about that because that's just...
I'll send you the video, it's wonderful.
Okay, good. So influential, like social media, they have so much power over people, and if this comes to reality, that would change so many things. Be kind of, I cannot imagine that world actually where people are
just let go.
Like able to see all perspectives. I mean, how would a normal person, educated kind of well, but not really deep in any of those, not really knowing how to search the important information and make his own mind without listening to others, suddenly being able to look at all the different perspectives online. Like, I'm not advocating for censorship, I just cannot imagine people being able to access everything.
Here's my problem with it. It's like, I agree. You're going to create a mess of information. But I'm an American, so my view about power is so different than yours. Right? So you think that, and I'm saying you, because I'll turn you into a generic European for this. But if you think that power can be used responsibly to protect us against good information and bad information, then I can understand the other side of the debate. I simply do not believe that about power at all. I believe that power will seek to expand itself. And so what we've seen in terms of censorship has been gross. What we've seen about, like right now, I'm not able to take my students to watch a Russian news program about the war in Ukraine. Now, will the program be true? I don't know. Do they have a right to watch it and make up their own mind? Yes, 100%. And the idea that we are somehow going to live in a world with the state of Russia and make peace with the state of Russia, but while at the same time denying any information to our citizens about them and denying any part of their narrative to enter into the world, we're crazy. I can move to, or I could go to Russia right now. I know I'll get many comments after this saying, why don't you move there? But I can go there and watch CNN. All right, I can go there and watch Western media. You can't do that here. I can do it in America, by the way. I can watch RT in America. It's Europe that doesn't allow me to watch those things. But that level of censorship to me is dangerous. Imagine I hate Russia and I want to destroy them. I don't, but imagine I do. I would still want to know every single thing I could about them. I wouldn't want to just listen to propaganda that makes me feel good. If I wanted to defeat my enemy, I need to know my enemy. And so we're doing ourselves no favors in this scenario we're living in. And we're making it impossible to win, we're making it impossible to make peace. And again, to get back to that point about America, if you believe that there's somebody in power that can protect us from the bad information and the good information, I disagree fundamentally. There is nobody who should ever have the power to decide what is good information and bad information. Ever. Because we have elections. And even if I'm a big fan of Jesus Christ and I put him in charge of that, well, the next election he's not in there. And it might be the opposite of him. And then that person gets to decide what's true and not true, and what I can and can't say. So I would encourage Europeans to think more than an election or two ahead. Because I told my students that this year. I said, do you guys really want to decide what I can and can't say on the internet? Don't you know Donald Trump's going to be elected soon? Don't you know you just gave him the power to decide what you can and can't say on the internet? And they don't take that argument seriously. Because for them, there's just so many things that it would be easy to say, you can't do this anymore, you can't do this anymore. Well, what if Donald Trump had taken power and said, you can no longer have pro-transgender talk online? Right? Who would want somebody to have that power? Not me. And I don't want it in any side of the political debate to be deciding which opinions can or cannot be put forward. So even, like I said, even if the best person that you can imagine has the power to decide what you and I can and can't say to each other, well, that person will be gone. But the power will stay. And it will be abused.
I just want to clarify, I'm not like endorsing censorship in any way,
No, of course
shape,
not.
or
No,
form.
no. And I'm trying to use that as a tool for me to argue with somebody, even though you're not arguing with me. I get it. So that's why I wanted to put you into the shoes of a generic sort of European.
Yeah.
Because I do think in general people here do trust government more than where I'm from.
You think?
Oh, yes. I said before this interview started, and I've said it many times to you guys before, Americans do not have the right to own a gun because they have the right to protect themselves from criminals. They have the right to protect themselves from house burglars. Our Constitution says we have the right to own a gun so that we can one day violently overthrow our government. That's why we have it. Governments will abuse you. They will always abuse you. That's why you always have to have the right to protect yourself. And even in what America considers to be the greatest democracy and the oldest democracy in the world, it is not immune to the abuses of power. And so I certainly think at a 1,000% level, Americans are more distrusting of their governments than Europeans. And especially that goes from freedom of speech right to the right to own guns. Both of those things do not exist in Europe.
Interesting. I have a maybe kind of philosophical question because you also teach theory of knowledge. The question is regarding if you think that humans are more naturally inclined towards good or evil, or if morality is kind of like a social construct.
No, not at all. I'm a religious person myself. But I think that even when I meet people who are not religious, I think the answer is incredibly clear. We have a conscience. You do. You have it. Everybody I've ever met has it. So even if I do something wrong, it haunts me. Something inside of me tells me I did something wrong. And I've never met anybody except for, I don't meet psychopaths, but I know that there are people in this world that lack that. I know that. But they are the exception. They are not the rule at all. So I think that when you and I lie, cheat, and steal, and abuse people, and humiliate people, we know it. And we're never able to escape that little judge inside of us. So to me, that is a perfect example of why I think people are good and have the potential to be good, and they can deny that potential. But I've never met anybody who can just go kick somebody while they're down and not know they did something wrong, if that makes sense. So for me, that throws in the garbage the idea that morality is just subjective.
Okay.
But again, you don't have to agree with that. And I made very sure to express, I'm a religious person, and that is largely where that comes from. But I've never, people are full of guilt when they do things that are wrong, even if they reject the concept of God. Even if they are, you know, hedonistic and openly rejecting God and pursuing pleasure for pleasure's sake, these people are capable of feeling guilt and knowing the difference between right and wrong. So what I would say is, yeah, we are a species that certainly knows the difference, and that gives us the potential to be incredibly wonderful. And maybe that is our natural state. And that's why we feel so bad when we move away from our natural state. Maybe that's what keeps us up at night when we feel guilty.
That's an interesting perspective. Because, like, I talk to people and they say, for example, that people have, like, a moral rudder, and that certain people view certain situations as good and other people as less good, and then bad, and then less bad, and then very bad. So, for example, if people do some actions, they see differently, you know.
The most common thing that's going to happen in any human being's lives, including yours or mine, is that my brain is going to want to protect itself, right? So if I do something wrong, right, I cheat on my wife, or I steal, or something like that, I'm going to think of as many excuses as I can to make it okay, all right? That is human nature. If we're going to talk about human nature, maybe that would be the component that you and I would agree on, is that we will try to rationalize our bad behavior, and we will lie to ourselves to do it. But again, that doesn't we still have to lie to ourselves, because there's still that voice in our head saying, what the hell did you just do? And then you start making things up. Then you start making excuses. Then you start, well, I was hungry so I could steal. You know, all of these different excuses for your behavior. But the only reason you'd ever have to make those excuses is because there's a little voice in your head saying, you messed up, buddy. So I think there is a natural tendency of people to want to make themselves feel better when they do mess up.
Yeah, that is true. I agree with you on that one. You mentioned just now this view of certain situations as just morally wrong. Do you think that this is by evolution, or by when parents raise their children?
No, I mean, if I'm a religious person, I think that it's far beyond evolutionary or social, but I can argue both of those things.
Okay, true.
So for example, I would say that something is right or wrong from a religious perspective simply because it is. And if you're not religious, that's not a very good argument. So let's do the evolutionary one, which is much more fun. According to evolutionary ethic, or what we could call Darwinian ethics, what makes something valuable is that it stays, right? It stays inside of the species. It stays inside of the population. If it's not valuable, we'll get rid of it. I'll get rid of my nipples someday as a man because we don't really use them, or our belly buttons might disappear someday, right? Because they're not useful. So according to Darwinian ethics, religions, especially the ones that have lasted thousands of years inside of our societies, because whether you know it or not, millions of religions have disappeared, right? Especially ones that are not useful. So useful religions tend to stick around in societies. And useful religions tend to reinforce ideas and behaviors that would be good for society. So for example, raising your children, being married in a monogamous family environment. These sorts of things are good for society in general, and they'll create a strong state rather than this live for pleasure's sake, don't take care of your children, don't take care of your partners. So you can see a lot of very important religious values that make society strong, right? Also, how much better are we off as a society if we hold on to religious values such as thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not. All of these religious ideas are very good for running a society even if God doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So from an evolutionary perspective, I think that I know a lot of people around me today, and I'm in Czech Republic is an example of a very atheistic country, where people still live by Christian values without having any of the beliefs that Jesus turns water into wine, that you're going to go to hell, but you're still adopted the values of the religion, and they still provide a foundation for how people interact on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say about that. In terms of how society runs itself, I would even be more straightforward on this. I will kill a mosquito and a spider. I feel nothing, Antona, nothing. And it's important for me to emphasize this because I don't want to sound like a serial killer, but when I was younger, I worked in a reptile store where we just had snakes, lizards, alligators, and things like that. And my job was to just kill mice, rats, rabbits, and put them in a freezer. So I'd go to work and I'd kill baby mice with my fingers, break their necks. And then I'd grab medium-sized ones and I'd get like that against the pole. And then I'd grab the big ones and I'd whack them against the pole. Then I'd go on to rats, bam, bam. Then rabbits. Antona, I used to have to hit them with a metal pipe. And if you don't hit them right, boy, do they bleed and scream and kick. And if they're kicking, they can scratch you. So I got pretty good at it. And I would kill 1,000 living creatures and put them in a freezer in different bags so that they could be fed to different sized animals. Because you don't want your $10,000 snake being bitten by a rat while he's getting eaten. So you'd feed him dead. And it also makes your animal less aggressive, so you'd feed them dead food. I would feel nothing when I went home. I don't lose any sleep at night going, oh, poor rat.
Yeah, but that developed, like, I guess that in...
No, I don't feel anything.
Yeah, but...
I don't. Again, spider, animal, nothing. If I kill you, it's different. You're not an animal. Does that make sense to you? And if I believed you were an animal, then all you would be is a bigger spider. Why would I feel anything? Now, whether you like it or not, religion, even to an atheist, puts human beings at a very different place than an animal. They do. And if I could think of a scenario where we are just in the animal kingdom, let's say you're a father and I'm a father, we both have 2 starving kids behind us. Yeah? There's a bag of rice right there. I will bite your throat out so fast if you're an animal. If you're a father and a human being and somebody with innate value, I'll give you the rice and my kids and I'll walk off to die. See the difference? Now, one of those societies is a very horrible society to live in, and one of them isn't. So the idea that, again, that I often hear about from atheists, whether they like it or not, they still borrow huge portions of their ethics from religion. And I know nobody who's an atheist that thinks of me as a mosquito that can be murdered and killed with no more importance than those mice that I butchered on a regular basis. And I really do mean that. We whether we believe it or not, whether we say it or not, and whether it's popular to say things like that in a place like the Czech Republic, I don't care. That's how you live. So you might profess to not believe in God, but your behavior reflects a strong belief in things that are not provable. You are an animal, but you don't believe that. And I am too, but you don't believe that. And you don't live that way. I think there's other parts of religion that are very interesting as well. And I mean this in terms of society, because I know you like talking about this stuff in general. We take a very religious outlook on each other when we talk about responsibility. when we talk about punishing people in society, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We seem to think that we have free will, which is a foolish religious concept that should not exist in a scientific world. But that's how we behave. In a scientific and a materialistic world, you are a product of your environment, the chemicals walking through your brain. Your actions were decided sometime around 13 billion years ago at the Big Bang, and we're just watching them play out. Somewhere along the line, we sprinkled in this concept that you are in control and you are responsible. You are not part of this creation that has to spin and explode with the Big Bang. You are a free agent that makes decisions inside of this environment.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we believe. It's a highly religious concept. Very weird one. Once again, removing the human being from the environment around them and elevating them to godlike status. So for me, these are fascinating things. And so even though people often reject religious or metaphysical thinking, they engage in it way more than they know.
Yeah. Religion gives good guidance to many people, I would say, in life, and their values, behaviors.
I'll tell you what was interesting for me as somebody who just went through some sort of existential crisis this weekend, right? I had 500-600 people tell me to go to hell and quit my job and all this kind of shit, right? Go home.
That must be tough.
Well, I can handle it. I'm a grown-up. But at the same time, right, when you are going through something difficult, it's tough to go through alone. And so I think that another part about religion is that especially when you are younger, you're not dealing with a lot of death. You're not dealing with fears and pains like you will as an adult, right? And some of those, man, some people don't make it through on their own. That doesn't mean that God exists, but it's a point about religion's value that I think is important.
That is a very important part of religion to all people, I think. To all religious people, I think. This is coming to an end, and I watch many podcasts, and on many podcasts they do this activity that the podcaster says a word, and the guest says one word, the first word that comes to their mind.
Oh, geez, oh, Pete's, man. This is scary. All right.
And so I have these words, and I just say them. You say the first word that comes to your mind, and then we end it. Okay, so...
Wait a second. Are you going to share this with the psychology teacher? Is this a... It's like a Rorschach test or something. Okay, let's give it a try. Let's try.
Just one word. Revolution.
One word?
Just the first word that comes to your mind when I say this word. It's like, for example, people...
Populist. Sorry.
Okay. Identity.
Politics.
Freedom.
Of speech.
Chaos.
Opportunity. No.
Wisdom.
Age.
Empire.
Over.
Legacy.
Legacy. Ego.
Illusion.
The Maya.
Resilience.
Resilience. Samud is the Arabic word for resilience that I see on TV every day.
Okay, interesting. Morality.
Morality. Good. How's that? Good. That's my answer.
Okay, sacrifice.
Better.
Civilization.
Good idea.
Betrayal.
Memory.
Utopia.
Impossible.
Existence.
Fun.
Tradition.
I hope so.
Conflict.
Resolution.
Ambition.
Ego.
And the last two is paradox.
Yeah. Look, identity politics. I'll just answer it with that. There's a lot of paradoxes inside of that movement in general.
And the last one is destiny.
Bullshit.
Thanks all of you for watching. I hope that this interview made you think, because that is one of my goals. I also hope that you learned something new. And if people want to get in contact with you, is that possible?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I understand that very well. And guys, this was Joseph Stanly DeVoir. So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Great,
Yeah,
man.
Good.
I think that went great.